What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Famous words that became the title of a Pulitzer Prize-winning play. They're by Langston Hughes. An American, a black man, a poet, novelist, playwright, and an active atheist all his life. This is the Atheist History Club, and I'm John Rafferty. I'm the president of the Secular Humanist Society of New York and also an active member of New York City Atheists. And welcome to the show. We're going to explore the lives and the sayings of atheists in history and big moments in atheist history. Langston Hughes worked all his life as an atheist as well as a writer, and he fell into a lot of trouble in the 50s because he lost a lot of his backing in the black community because he campaigned against corruption in black storefront churches, and also because his politics drifted further and further to the left until he became an active communist and got in real trouble with the McCarthy committees. But listen, Christ, he wrote, you did all right in your day, I reckon, but that day's gone now. They ghosted you up a swell story, too. Called it Bible, but it's dead now. The popes and the preachers made too much money from it. They've sold you to too many. Langston Hughes died in 1967, just as the second civil rights movement was reaching its peak. America never was America to me, he wrote, and yet I swear this oath, America will be. What we're doing here at the Atheist History Club is reviewing history week by week. So each week you'll hear about different atheists and about different moments in atheism in history. On February 2nd, in Ireland, James Joyce, who many regard as the greatest writer of the 20th century in the English language, was born in 1882. His most famous book, of course, was Ulysses. Joyce left Ireland because he could not live under the strictures and the insane policies of the Roman Catholic Church that ran Ireland, essentially. Even though he lived most of his adult life outside Ireland, all his books and short stories were set in Ireland. His first major book, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, which was really about his own life, was published in London in 1916. Actually, it had been first published in Dublin in 1914, but the Catholic printer who was going to publish it was so enraged by its atheist point of view that he burned the book and destroyed the plates. At any rate, Joyce lived an active atheist all his life, and I love his short poem that appears in Ulysses that mocks the whole concept of the Jesus Christ Redeemer. I'm the queerest young fellow that you ever heard. My mother's a Jew, my father's a bird. With Joseph the joiner I cannot agree, so here's to disciples and Calvary. If anyone thinks I amn't divine, he'll get no free drinks when I'm making the wine, but have to drink water and wish it were plain that I make when the wine becomes water again. Goodbye now, goodbye, write down all I said, and tell Tom, Dick, and Harry I rose from the dead. What's bred in the bone cannot fail me to fly, and Olivet's breezy. Goodbye now, goodbye. Joyce remained an emigre all his life because, as he said, I will not serve that in which I no longer believe, whether it call itself my home, my fatherland, or my church. and I will try to express myself in some mode of life or art as freely as I can and as wholly as I can, using for my defense the only arms, his genius. His genius is well recognized, but of course, reading Joyce can be pretty tough. And I just came across a wonderful quote of his. So many people have given up on reading Ulysses, and certainly, like me, given up trying to read Finnegan's Wake. And Joyce said, I put in so many enigmas and puzzles that it will keep the professors busy for centuries arguing over what I meant, and that's the only way of ensuring one's immortality. Well, he's immortal and an atheist. On February 2nd, in 1905, in Russia, Alice Rosenbaum was born in St. Petersburg to a non-observant Jewish family. She became an atheist as a teenager and immigrated to the United States in 1925, where she renamed herself Ein, which rhymes with Ein, which rhymes with mine, after a Finnish woman she knew, and the Rand came from her Remington Rand typewriter. Ayn Rand, the writer of We the Living, The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged, and the founder of the philosophy of objectivism, with which I do not agree in one word. However, Ayn Rand was a very influential atheist in the United States and, in fact, in the world. She worked for Hollywood studios as a writer, as an extra, and she was married for a long time to Frank O'Connor. But she made waves with her book, The Fountainhead, which became a huge bestseller, and then a big successful motion picture in the 40s, starring Gary Cooper as the architect who destroys the building. He blows up the building that he built because the client who was paying for the building made some changes in it. And as far as Ayn Rand's philosophy is concerned, nobody has the right to change anybody else's work or opinions or words. As she wrote, from the smallest necessity to the highest religious abstraction, from the wheel to the skyscraper, everything we are and everything we have comes from one attribute of man, the function of his reasoning mind. Ask yourself, she said, whether the dream of heaven and greatness should be waiting for us in our graves, or whether it should be ours here and now and on this earth. As I say, a very important and powerful atheist in 20th century America, but her philosophy, which would leave people starving in the gutters if they couldn't fend for themselves, something I can't agree with. A much gentler soul was Henry Havelock Ellis, whose first name Henry was pretty much dropped from the popular usage of his name. His most important book was a 6-volume Studies in the Psychology of Sex. He was the forward-thinking sexologist whose views were considered so controversial that a bookseller was once arrested just for selling one of his books. Ellis was another atheist all his life, and as a matter of fact, he wrote, had there been a lunatic asylum in the suburbs of Jerusalem, Jesus Christ would infallibly have been shut up in it at the outset of his public career. That interview with Satan on the pinnacle of a temple would alone have damned him, and everything that happened after would have confirmed the diagnosis. The whole religious complexion of the modern world is due to the absence from Jerusalem of a lunatic asylum. Havelock Ellis, born February 2nd, 1859, and he lived all the way to 1939, and he changed the world's view of sex. Have you ever read Hawaii, Tales of the South Pacific? Have you seen the movie The Bridges at Toko-Ri, or Sayonara, or Hawaii, or seen the musical South Pacific? All of them based on the work of James Michener. Who was born on February 3rd. James Michener took his experiences in the Second World War in the South Pacific and made himself an internationally famous author by writing the Tales of the South Pacific, and then Hawaii and others that were focused in that area of the world. Michener was born an orphan and grew up in an orphanage in Pennsylvania, and was eventually adopted by a Quaker couple. And he had a tough childhood, but as he said, that if you go through a childhood like mine, it's not all bad. The sad part is most of us didn't come out. But Michener was a studious child who read voluminously, and who because there was a bigger world that he wanted to see, at the age of 14, he ran away and started hitchhiking around the United States with only 35 cents in his pocket. I went everywhere, he said, and I did it for nothing. Until the Second World War came along, he volunteered. He was stationed in the Pacific. Michener had huge success and popularity. There was a time, about 10 years, in the 40s and 50s, when he was the most recognizable author in the United States, and appeared on television, of course, and was interviewed for every time something literary or artistic came up. Michener was questioned as to his opinions, and he stated his opinions very clearly one day when he said, "I decided, after listening to a talk radio commentator who had abused and vilified and scorned every noble cause to which I had devoted my entire life, that I was both a humanist and a liberal, each of the most dangerous and vilified type. I am a humanist," he said, "because I think humanity can, with constant moral guidance, create a reasonably decent society. I am terrified of restrictive religious doctrine, having learned from history that when men who adhere to any form of it are in control, common men like me are in peril. I do not believe that pure reason can solve the perceptual problems unless it is modified by poetry and art and social vision. So I am a humanist. And if you want to charge me with being the most virulent kind, a secular humanist, I accept the accusation." That interview appeared in Parade magazine in 1991, shortly before he died, and caused quite a stir, as you can imagine, from the readers of that Sunday supplement across the red states, as we now call them, of America. On February 7th, in the United States, in 1885, Sinclair Lewis was born in Minnesota. He wrote such enduring classic novels as Main Street in 1920, Babbitt in 1922, Aerosmith in 1925, one of the biggest bestsellers in American history, and Elmer Gantry in 1927. Elmer
Elmer Gantry is an all-American boy. He's interested in money, sex, and religion.
Who is this Elmer Gantry? And what do you really know about him? His background, his reputation. And what does he want? Money? My job? You? What?
Bill.
In 1917, Mr. Gantry was expelled from a theological seminary in Kansas for seducing a Miss Lula Baines, the deacon's daughter, in the church where he had that day delivered a Christmas sermon.
What the hell's the big idea?
Elmer.
You really think I'm going to sit still for a shakedown?
Baby, how could I put the
The
squeeze
old
on
Thatcher
you?
game, huh?
Who's going to take the word of a $5 hooker
You better
against
make it
Elmer
good.
Gantry? I only wanted to see you for,
For what?
well, for...
For what?
What do you think will get you into God's own glorious heaven? This ace of spades? Your bank book? Or this pledge to be a good Christian?
I'd like to tear those holy wings off you, make a real woman out of you. I'd show you what heaven's like. No golden stairways or harp music or silvery clouds. Just ecstasy, coming and going. Sin, sin, sin. You're all sinners. You're all doomed to perdition.
What is a revival? Is it a church? Is it a religion? Or is it a circus sideshow complete with freaks, magic, and rabble-rousing?
You hate Gantry that much? Or do you love him that much? And you're no good to me. Or yourself. You're no good to anybody.
That's a dirty lie. We pay...
Shame, shame!
Gantry, the classic description of a preacher who is a hypocrite, a rogue, and who bilks the public that he is supposedly saving. Wrote, "It can't happen here in 1935," which was a warning to America that fascism, which was of course then rampant in Europe, might very possibly happen here in America. But as he warned, in America it would come with a Bible in its hand. Lewis was an unbeliever and an outright atheist from his earliest days, known for it, distinguished for it at Yale, and a fervent believer in democracy and the right of the people to overturn the injustices that they saw in American society, not least of which was the crushing weight of evangelical Christianity in rural America, which was what his whole theme in Elmer Gantry was all about. He once turned down a Pulitzer Prize for political reasons, but he was the first American to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. And his attitude towards religion is summed up very briefly when he said, "It is, I think, an error to believe that there is any need of religion to make life seem worth living." Also on February 7th, but in England, the man who invented Christmas was born in 1812. That Man Who Invented Christmas is the name of a very recently published book about Charles Dickens. Of course, who wrote A Christmas Carol. As a child, he chafed the 2-hour religious services he and his family attended. His biography on the Freedom from Religion website says that his brief experience working as a 12-year-old in a factory when his father was sent to a debtor's prison had a life-changing effect on him. Dickens never forgot, no matter how far he went in life, what it was like to work in a factory in Victorian England. He married, had 10 children, 9 of whom survived, and their demands kept him writing furiously all his life to make the money he needed to support that family. He has written, of course, The Pickwick Papers, Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, A Tale of Two Cities, and Great Expectations, classics of the English language, not American at all. But, however, his tours in America were hugely successful. They were booked and sold out months in advance, and people flocked to see the man who had written A Christmas Carol. He was not an atheist per se. Let's get that. But he loathed the established churches of his time. He joined the Unitarians, which had no creed, for a while, and even though he went back to the Church of England for a while, he quit it again, saying, "I cannot sit under a clergyman who addresses his congregation as though he had taken a return ticket to heaven and back." He hated, one of his biographers said, the Roman Catholic Church, that curse upon the world, he called it, as the oppressor of Europe. And going back to his experience as a factory hand, as an underage child, Dickens worked very hard to oppose a bill in Parliament to ban public activity and recreational outlets on Sunday. He writing a pamphlet called Sunday Under Three Heads, which jibed at the saintly venom and the intolerant zeal and ignorant enthusiasm of the pious. Why? Because working people worked 8, 10, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and what the pious wanted was to take away the only day that they had for recreation. Don't play games. Don't enjoy family outings. Go to church. Sit there. Kneel there. And think about how you can be a better worker the other 6 days of the week. He accepted the teachings of Christ, said one of his biographers, not the doctrines of the Christian churches. Perhaps the best way to wrap up this week in atheist history is to consider Gertrude Stein. One of the most influential writers in the English language of the 20th century. Even though her own writings, her own books weren't popular, she was a writer's writer, and she was consulted by Hemingway, by Fitzgerald, by many others who learned at her feet, very often in her apartment in Paris, where she lived for 30 or 40 years with her lover Aristocles, and where she held court, and where she famously called those writers who called on her, who had lived through the terrible times of the First World War, the lost generation, a phrase that has become part of the language. Her attitude towards religion, towards God, towards belief, is summed up best by this atheist, Gertrude Stein. There ain't no answer. There ain't gonna be any answer. There never has been an answer. That's the answer. And this is the Atheist History Club. See you next week.